True men take care of family, my brother claimed while staying in my home for free. Don't be greedy, his wife chimed in. I simply nodded. This morning, I woke up to 13 missed calls. True men take care of family, my brother claimed while staying in my home for free. Don't be greedy, his wife chimed in. I simply nodded. This morning, I woke up to 13 missed calls. I stared at my phone, heart pounding as each vibrating alert echoed the unresolved burdens of our shared past. The names on the call log were like specters from a time I'd tried to bury, now clawing their way back into the present. Daniel, my older brother, had always been the unpredictable force in our family, charming, reckless, and haunted by secrets that time could never fully erase. When he reappeared after years of absence, promising redemption and refuge under our roof, I had welcomed him with cautious arms. His wife, Miriam, with her unwavering composure and steely resolve, balanced his chaotic presence. But that morning, as I weighed the relentless summons from my phone, I sensed that his return was not a simple family reunion. It was the spark that would ignite a long-dormant conflagration of guilt and buried sins. The day began unassumingly. Over a sparse breakfast, the clatter of cutlery against chipped porcelain underscored our strained silence. Daniel's eyes, shadowed with remorse and defiance, met mine as he murmured, "Family means standing together, no matter what." His tone, heavy with unspoken truths, betrayed a weariness that made it clear our once unbreakable bond was now marred by hidden transgressions. Miriam's steady nod offered no comfort, only a reminder that in our family, emotions were guarded, as carefully as the secrets we harbored. Seeking respite from the tension, I left the confines of our house and wandered through the familiar streets of our old neighborhood, a landscape etched with faded memories and the bittersweet aroma of nostalgia. The early autumn air was crisp, carrying the promise of change even as it stirred echoes of the past. Each step along the cracked sidewalks and beneath the flickering glow of street lamps reminded me that no matter how far I ran, the past was never truly behind us. It was during one of these aimless walks that I encountered Mark, an old friend whose life had taken a different, equally turbulent path. His weathered face told tales of hardship and regret, yet his eyes still held the mischievous spark of a man who had stared down his own demons. As we sat on a battered bench beneath a flickering street lamp, he leaned in and said in a low, conspiratorial tone, "Rumors have a way of resurfacing, you know. They say that the sins we buried long ago are catching up with us." His words, laced with foreboding, resonated deep within me, a stark reminder that secrets have a persistent way of clawing their way back into the light. Returning home, I found that the very air inside had shifted. Our house, once a sanctuary of familiarity and routine, now throbbed with tension. Daniel paced the living room with restless energy, each measured step a silent countdown to an inevitable reckoning. Miriam sat by the window, her gaze fixed on the gathering storm outside as though she could divine what fate had in store. The intermittent buzz of my phone and the steady tick of an ancient clock punctuated the oppressive silence, marking the passage of time as we all awaited a confrontation that we had long avoided. Unable to ignore the summons any longer, I answered. The next ring. A gravelly voice, cool and detached, delivered a message that chilled me to the bone. "Your family's past is catching up with you. Meet me tonight at the old warehouse on the outskirts of town, or face the consequences of your..." Silence. The ultimatum was not a mere threat. It was a declaration that the time for evasion was over, and that every hidden transgression would soon be laid bare. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a haze of anxious introspection. I found myself sifting through old photographs and letters that chronicled a time when our family's laughter filled every corner of our home. Each faded image and yellowed page was a bittersweet reminder of days when love and loyalty had been simpler, untainted by the corrosive power of secrets. In the attic, hidden among relics of a more innocent past, I discovered Daniel's journal. Its pages, scrawled hastily and filled with frantic entries, chronicled clandestine meetings, dangerous liaisons, and mounting debts incurred in desperate moments. Each word was a confession, a roadmap of missteps that had led us inexorably to this precipice. As dusk bled into a bruised purple sky and the first steady drops of rain began to fall, the storm outside mirrored the turmoil within. The ominous call was a harbinger of change, a force that would shatter our carefully constructed facade. With trepidation and reluctant resolve, I phoned Daniel to insist that we confront this looming threat together. His initial response was guarded, laced with defiant resistance. But as the minutes passed and the rain intensified, his tone softened. He reluctantly agreed to meet, the gravity of the situation unmistakable in his weary voice. That night, the journey to the warehouse felt like a descent into a realm where time had no dominion. The rain-slicked streets were deserted, illuminated only by the harsh glare of sporadic streetlights and the reflective sheen of puddles on cracked asphalt. I drove slowly, every turn of the wheel a hesitant step toward an uncertain future. The warehouse itself emerged from the darkness like a relic of forgotten sins, a decaying monolith whose broken windows stared blankly into the storm as if bearing witness to the unraveling of our lives. Inside, darkness reigned supreme. The scent of rust and decay pervaded the air, and every footstep echoed through the cavernous space as though announcing the arrival of long-concealed truths. Navigating the labyrinth of abandoned corridors, I felt the cold, damp air seep into my bones, mingling with the chill of dread that had haunted me for years. In a vast, shadowed chamber illuminated only by the weak glow of a sputtering street lamp, I finally saw him, a solitary figure cloaked in mystery and silent authority. He did not speak immediately. His silence was a language in itself, heavy, with the weight of untold stories. After a long, pregnant pause, he finally broke the stillness. "You cannot escape your past," he said softly, each word deliberate and imbued with a sense of inevitability. "Every secret, every lie, has a way of resurfacing, no matter how deeply you bury it." His voice was calm, yet carried an undercurrent, a finality that sent a shiver racing down my spine. For what felt like an eternity, we sat in that desolate room, the rhythmic patter of rain against the corrugated metal roof punctuating our silence. In that charged stillness, I felt the gravity of my choices pressing in from every side. The warehouse, with its crumbling walls and oppressive shadows, became a crucible where the sins of the past would finally confront the present. Every creak of the old floorboards, every whisper of wind through shattered panes, was a reminder that our family's history was not something that could be locked away and forgotten. I left that place with a mind swirling with questions, and a heart burdened by the certainty that the night's encounter was only the beginning. As I drove back through rain-drenched streets under a sky that seemed perpetually heavy with unspoken sorrow, memories of our childhood flooded back. I recalled the days of carefree mischief, when our laughter was unburdened by guilt, and our dreams were as boundless as the summer sky. But those days were irrevocably lost, replaced by a reality where every step was shadowed by the sins of our past. The familiar route home now felt alien, each landmark a stark reminder of how far we had strayed from the innocence of youth. At home, the atmosphere was transformed. What was once a refuge now felt like a crucible of secrets waiting to ignite. Daniel sank into silence, his eyes fixated on old family photos that no longer captured the joy they once did. Miriam moved through the house with a subdued grace, her gaze often distant, as if she were searching for something to hold on to amidst the chaos. Late that night, as the relentless drumming of rain provided a somber lullaby, I lay awake wrestling with the enormity of the situation. The weight of the mysterious call, the evidence unearthed in a forgotten journal, and the spectral warnings of a shadowy figure all converged into a single, inescapable truth. The past was not done with us yet. It was coming back, demanding, to be faced, to be acknowledged, and to be atoned for. In the quiet hours before dawn, with the storm still raging outside and my thoughts a turbulent sea of regret and resolve, I realized that the path to redemption would not be found in denial or evasion. It would be forged in the painful, unyielding confrontation with every secret and every lie that had driven us apart. The burden of our shared history was heavy, but it was also the key to understanding who we truly were, and perhaps to rebuilding what had been lost. With the first light of dawn barely piercing the gloom, I resolved to brace myself for the inevitable collision of past and present. The coming days promised to be fraught with revelations that would shake the very foundations of our family. Yet within that impending chaos flickered a fragile hope. A hope that by facing the darkness together, we might reclaim a future untainted by the shadows of our mistakes. As I sit here now, still trembling from the echoes of the night's revelations and the relentless patter of rain against my window, I know that nothing will ever be the same again. The journey I have begun, this arduous, painful path toward truth and redemption, has only just started. And though the storm rages on outside, I find a quiet resolve in knowing that the road ahead, however treacherous, may yet lead us back to a place where forgiveness and understanding can blossom anew. Решта ночі пройшла у роздумах. Вперше за довгий час я відчув, що маю перед собою відкрите поле для боротьби. Часом ми намагаємось уникнути зустрічі з власним минулим, сподіваючись, що воно розвіється під натиском часу та забуття. Але правда, як і біль, не зникає, а лише ховається, чекаючи свого моменту. І ось цей момент настав для нас. Настав, щоб змусити нас дивитися в очі своїм помилкам і, можливо, незабаром своєму спасінню. Наступного ранку я прокинувся від відчуття тяжкого вантажу, що опустився мені на груди. Будь-які спроби відсунути думки забрали мені спокій і залишили тільки тривогу. Мабуть, це був крок до того, щоб зрозуміти, що після цієї ситуації ми залишимо позаду чимало недомовок і термінових питань. Я навіть не знав, що сказати братові, коли ми зустрінемось після того, що так чи інакше змінює всю динаміку наших стосунків. Після вечірнього візиту на склад ми влаштували сімейну нараду. Невеликі розмови, сповнені мовчазності, поглядів і можливості через слова перенести розуміння правди. Мої очі зустріли погляд братів. Губи наткнули на мовчазний запит, хоча я бачив, як в його всіх руках була потреба зрозуміти слова і свого віку. Х'ярат АБДН для 30 секунд. The days that followed the warehouse meeting were a turbulent blend of restless nights and halting steps toward clarity. At home, the oppressive silence that had once weighed on every room began to transform into an unspoken understanding, a fragile truce between guilt and the desperate need for absolution. Daniel, who had long carried the reckless fire of his past, moved about with a quiet resignation. His once boisterous laughter was replaced by moments of introspection, and his eyes, shadowed with regret, seemed to search for an escape from the demons he had long tried to outrun. Miriam, ever the silent sentinel, retreated into the background, her every gesture a measured response to the mounting pressure that now permeated our lives. And I, burdened by the relentless echoes of that ominous call, found myself teetering between the desire to run and the need to face what lay ahead. In the quiet hours of one rain-lashed evening, when the sound of droplets against the window merged with the steady hum of the city beyond, we gathered around our old wooden dining table, a relic from better days. The envelope, with its damning contents, lay open before us like a mirror reflecting our collective sins. Daniel broke the silence first, his voice rough with emotion as he recounted the moments that had led him down this perilous path. He spoke, haltingly, of secret meetings in dimly lit backrooms, of promises made in the haze of desperation, and of alliances forged with figures whose loyalty was as transient as smoke. His confession was raw and unfiltered, a stark contrast to the carefully constructed facade he had maintained for so long. Miriam's eyes, glistening with unshed tears, filled in the gaps between his words. She revealed how, night after night, she had silently borne the weight of his choices, hoping that by keeping the family together, some semblance of order could be salvaged. Her voice, steady but laced with a profound sadness, spoke of endless sacrifices and the unbearable cost of secrets. As she spoke, I sensed that the air around us was shifting, each word unraveling a thread of the tapestry we had so desperately tried to keep intact. For a long while, we sat in that muted atmosphere, the only sounds being the occasional creak of the old house and the steady patter of rain. The evidence in the envelope, once a source of dread, now began to serve as a catalyst for truth. It was clear that the mysterious caller had not come merely to threaten us, but to force our hand, to compel us to confront the long-neglected fractures in our family. That night, as the storm outside subsided into a gentle drizzle, we made a tentative pact to face the past head-on, regardless of the pain it might bring, and to find a path toward redemption, however narrow and uncertain it might be. But the road to absolution was not one we could travel in isolation. The call had set in motion a series of events that demanded a confrontation with a force beyond our immediate circle. In the days that followed, I found myself drawn back to the warehouse, a place that had become the grim stage for our reckoning. I needed answers, and I needed to understand the identity and motivations of the shadowy figure who had forced our hand. With a mixture of dread and resolve, I returned one damp, overcast night, leaving behind the tenuous safety of our home and venturing once again into the realm of forgotten promises and hidden truths. The warehouse, now eerily familiar, loomed in the darkness like a monument to regret. I stepped inside cautiously, the air thick with the musk of decay and the residue of long-held secrets. The corridors, once silent and foreboding, now seemed to whisper fragments of conversations past. In a secluded corner of the building, a room illuminated only by the flickering light of an old, swinging bulb, I encountered him once more. The man whose earlier words had chilled me to the core now regarded me with an intensity that was almost sorrowful. His eyes, dark and unyielding, met mine as he spoke in a tone that was both accusatory and mournful. "You came back," he said, his voice low and measured, as if each syllable carried the weight of a lifetime of regrets. "I did not come here to destroy you, but to offer you a chance to mend what has been broken." His words, unexpected in their compassion, stirred something deep within me, a longing for forgiveness and a desire to atone for the mistakes that had haunted our family for so long. He introduced himself as Victor, a name that, until that moment, had been as elusive as the truths we had tried to bury. Victor explained that he, too, had once been entangled in the web of our collective past. He had been a friend, an associate, and eventually a victim of the reckless decisions that had marked Daniel's life. His family, he revealed, had suffered immensely as a consequence of the betrayals and broken promises that had flowed unchecked through our lives. Victor's own journey had led him down a dark path, one from which he had clawed his way back only to discover that forgiveness was a rare and elusive commodity. "I stand here not as your enemy, but as a witness to the cost of our sins," he said, his tone heavy with a mixture of anger and resignation. "I want to see you take responsibility, not just for yourselves, but for the damage that has been inflicted upon others." For hours in that desolate room, Victor and I talked. He recounted vivid details of a past where loyalty was betrayed and trust shattered. A past where my brother's actions had left scars not only on our family, but on innocent lives. His words painted a picture of consequences far graver than mere familial discord. As he spoke, I felt the full weight of our collective failures. It was as if the ghosts of those we had wronged had gathered in that cold space, demanding acknowledgement and restitution. The conversation was agonizingly honest, stripping away any pretense of innocence and leaving in its wake a raw, unfiltered truth. Leaving the warehouse that night, I carried with me a new burden, a responsibility not just to my family, but to the unseen victims of our past misdeeds. I knew that confronting the truth would require more than whispered confessions in a dimly lit room. It would mean stepping into the light of accountability, exposing our darkest secrets to the scrutiny of the world. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the storm clouds, I convened a meeting with Daniel and Miriam. The atmosphere was heavy with the anticipation of inevitable confrontation, yet there was a subtle undercurrent of determination that spoke of a collective desire for change. In that somber gathering, I shared everything that had transpired with Victor, the details of his revelations, the pain of the lives we had unknowingly altered, and the stark reality that our actions had consequences that reached far beyond the confines of our home. Daniel's reaction was a tumult of denial and anguish. He insisted that he had acted out of desperation, that every misstep had been driven by circumstances beyond his control. But as the conversation deepened, even he could no longer hide behind the veneer of justified mistakes. Miriam, whose steady resolve had long held our fractured family together, finally allowed herself to break down, admitting that the burden of secrets had eroded her spirit over the years. Her tears were not just for herself, but for the innocence that had been lost in the chaos of our lives. The conversation stretched late into the night, a cathartic unraveling of years of suppressed emotions and half-truths. We debated, we argued, and ultimately, we began to understand that the path to redemption required us to acknowledge every painful detail, even those that shattered our illusions of a perfect family. In that vulnerable exchange, the walls we had built around ourselves started to crumble. We made a tentative promise to seek help, to confront the consequences of our actions openly, and to strive for a future where honesty, however painful, could pave the way for healing. In the weeks that followed, our small household transformed into a microcosm of tentative hope. We sought the counsel of a mediator, a wise older woman whose gentle demeanor belied a steely resolve born of her own battles with regret and loss. Under her guidance, we began to dismantle the fortress of silence that had long encircled us. Each session was a journey into the depths of our shared history, a painstaking process of piecing together the fragments of a story that had been scattered by years of denial. There were moments of raw vulnerability, of voices trembling with unshed tears, of confessions whispered in the quiet of the night. And gradually, we learned to listen to one another with empathy instead of judgment. Meanwhile, Victor's presence lingered in my thoughts like a constant reminder of the cost of our actions. I began to understand that forgiveness was not a simple, linear process, but a winding road strewn with obstacles. There were days when the ghosts of our past seemed too powerful to overcome, when the guilt weighed so heavily that every step toward reconciliation felt like an insurmountable climb. Yet, in the midst of that struggle, there emerged small, precious moments of clarity, a shared smile over an old photograph, the gentle touch of a hand in silent support, the quiet recognition that, despite everything, we were still bound by a love that had weathered countless storms. One crisp evening, as autumn's chill began to seep into the corners of our home, a letter arrived, an unassuming envelope with no return address. Inside, in careful, deliberate handwriting, was a message from one of Victor's acquaintances, a woman whose life had been irrevocably altered by the choices we had made. Her words, filled with both sorrow and a glimmer of forgiveness, recounted the pain of loss and the slow, painful journey toward healing. She wrote of the ripple effects of our actions, of lives shattered and mended in the wake of our misdeeds, and of the possibility, however distant, of finding redemption. That letter, fragile as it was, became a turning point. It reminded us that while we could never undo the past, we could choose to shape the future with a commitment to truth, accountability, and compassion. As the days turned into months, our family began to rebuild itself, not as a perfect, unblemished unit, but as something more resilient and honest. The journey was fraught with setbacks. Old wounds would reopen unexpectedly, and moments of despair would threaten to derail our progress. Yet, through it all, we learned to lean on one another, to forgive not only each other but also ourselves for the mistakes that had led us to this crossroads. I found solace in writing, documenting our shared journey as a way to process the complex tapestry of emotions that now defined our days. Each word was a step toward healing, a tribute to the painful truth that the path to redemption is often paved with the fragments of broken dreams and hard-won wisdom. In time, the specter of the mysterious calls began to fade into the background, a haunting memory replaced by the steady rhythm of a new, tentative life. Victor's revelations, though indelible, no longer held us hostage to our past. Instead, they served as a constant reminder that the price of silence was too high and that true freedom could only be achieved through the courage to confront even the darkest parts of ourselves. Now, as I sit by the window on a quiet evening, watching the last vestiges of daylight give way to a calm, starry sky, I reflect on the journey that has brought us to this fragile moment of peace. Our family remains a work in progress, a mosaic of scars and hopes, of regrets and the possibility of new beginnings. The echoes of that fateful night, the relentless patter of rain, and the stark lessons learned in cold, dark corridors will forever be etched in our hearts. But so too will be the strength we discovered in our shared vulnerability, the quiet determination to rise above our past, and the enduring truth that forgiveness, though elusive, is always within reach. In the end, we learned that redemption is not a destination but a continuous journey, a process of confronting our own imperfections and finding, amid the ruins of old mistakes, the courage to build something better. Our story, marked by pain and transformation, serves as a testament to the power of truth and the enduring bonds of family. Even now, as new challenges loom on the horizon, I hold on to the belief that by facing our past head-on, we can forge a future defined not by our mistakes, but by our resolve to learn from them. And in that resolve, there is a quiet, unyielding hope. A hope that, no matter how dark the night, the promise of a new dawn will always guide us home.